What if I told you some of the most dangerous X-rated movies of the 1960s now look more intelligent than half the films Hollywood makes today? Back then, an X could mean controversial ideas, disturbing violence, forbidden relationships, or simply refusing to follow polite society's rules. Britain's X certificate and America's later X rating were not automatically what the label suggests today. And surprisingly, many of these supposedly scandalous movies became genuine classics. If you enjoy forgotten movies Hollywood would rather leave buried, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Number 20. Beat Girl, 1960. Long before swinging London became fashionable, this rebellious British drama was already wandering through its darker corners. Gillian Hills plays Jennifer, a wealthy teenager, furious about her father's new marriage, and fascinated by the beatnik scene around Soho. Instead of behaving like the respectable young woman her family expects, Jennifer enters smoky clubs filled with music, dancing, and characters her father would never invite home. Christopher Lee appears as Kenny King, the owner of a questionable nightclub who realizes Jennifer's rebellious streak could be useful to him. One of the movie's defining sequences takes place inside the Offbeat Club, where the music, dancing, and restless young crowd make respectable London seem a million miles away. By modern standards, much of it looks surprisingly restrained. In 1960, however, references to prostitution, provocative dancing, and reckless youth behavior were enough for British censors to demand cuts before granting the film an X certificate. That controversy actually makes Beat Girl more fascinating today. It is less shocking than it is a colorful snapshot of a generation beginning to push back against old rules. Number 19. Saturday Night and Sunday Morning, 1960. Few movies captured working-class frustration as sharply as this one. Albert Finney plays Arthur Seaton, a Nottingham factory worker who spends his weekdays operating machinery and his weekends trying to escape everything the factory represents. Arthur drinks, jokes, argues, and refuses to accept the quiet future older people expect him to inherit. His biggest problem is that his private life has become dangerously complicated, particularly because of his relationship with Brenda, the wife of another factory worker. The unforgettable opening establishes his entire personality. Arthur is surrounded by endless industrial noise while angrily insisting that nobody is going to control him. Later, an alcohol-fueled evening turns his confidence into reckless embarrassment, showing that rebellion has consequences. Its frank approach to adult relationships, pregnancy, and working-class life helped earn Saturday Night and Sunday Morning an X certificate on its original British release. What once looked scandalous now feels brutally authentic. Finney's performance turns Arthur into something more interesting than a simple rebel. He is a man terrified that ordinary life is already closing around him. If you remember seeing any of these films when they first appeared, tell us in the comments what audiences really thought about them. And if you're enjoying the countdown, subscribe now because the movies become much more controversial from here. Number 18. Only Two Can Play, 1962. Sometimes an X certificate could be earned without horror or extreme violence. Peter Sellers proved that with this surprisingly gentle but very adult comedy. Sellers plays John Lewis, a bored Welsh librarian trapped between an unexciting career, family responsibilities, and dreams of something more glamorous. Then he meets Liz, an attractive woman connected to the local theater world who might also help him obtain a better job. What follows is essentially a comedy about temptation. John keeps imagining himself as a sophisticated romantic figure, only for reality to repeatedly make him look ridiculous. One of the funniest sequences involves his attempts to behave confidently around Liz, while clearly realizing that his carefully constructed double life could collapse at any second. The British X certificate came largely because of the movie's unusually open relationship jokes and adult references. Yet the film is never merely provocative. Sellers makes John vain, foolish, and strangely sympathetic. That is what still works. Beneath the comedy is a recognizable story about an ordinary man wondering whether the exciting life he imagines would actually make him happier. Number 17. The L-Shaped Room, 1962. Behind the ordinary door of a cheap London boarding house sits one of the decade's most compassionate dramas. Leslie Caron plays Jane Fawcett, a young Frenchwoman who arrives in Britain unmarried and pregnant. Instead of returning to her comfortable previous life, she rents a cramped L-shaped room in a building filled with outsiders, lonely people, and characters polite society prefers not to discuss. Her relationship with struggling writer Toby becomes the emotional center. Their romance develops slowly, because both know Jane's future is uncertain. Some of the best scenes are simply conversations inside that tiny room, where two people try to decide whether affection is enough to overcome circumstances neither can easily change. The movie also depicts its boarding house residents with unusual sympathy rather than treating them as jokes. That mattered in early 1960s British cinema. An X certificate reflected subjects that censors considered strictly adult at the time, including unmarried pregnancy and unconventional relationships. Today, the shock has disappeared, revealing what was there all along. A tender, beautifully acted movie about loneliness, judgment, and people attempting to build temporary families in an unforgiving city. Number 16. The Damned, 1963. At first, this looks like a tough little British crime movie. Then, it suddenly becomes something far stranger. An American tourist becomes involved with a young woman whose aggressive brother leads a motorcycle gang. Their conflict sends the story toward the coast, where the characters accidentally discover a secret government facility containing children who possess a terrifying connection to radiation. That bizarre shift is exactly why The Damned remains memorable. The famous discovery of the isolated children changes everything. What seemed like street-level danger becomes a bleak science fiction story about authorities preparing for a future they already believe is unavoidable. Oliver Reed brings tremendous menace as the gang leader, but the government officials may ultimately be even more unsettling because they calmly justify everything they are doing. British censors awarded the film an X certificate without cuts in late 1961, although its British theatrical release did not arrive until 1963. Hammer barely promoted it, yet its reputation slowly grew. Today, The Damned feels decades ahead of many conventional atomic-age thrillers. It is pessimistic, political, and unwilling to provide an easy escape. Number 15. The Leather Boys, 1964. Motorcycles promise freedom in this film, but almost every character discovers that freedom is more complicated than simply riding away. Young Reggie marries Dot before either of them understands what marriage actually demands. Their relationship quickly becomes strained, and Reggie spends increasing amounts of time with fellow biker Pete, whose emotional attachment to him runs deeper than ordinary friendship. The cafes, leather jackets, Triumph motorcycles, and nighttime roads give the movie an irresistible period atmosphere. Yet the most important moments are quiet ones, particularly as Reggie slowly begins to understand something about Pete that he had never seriously considered. For 1964 audiences, that subject matter was bold. The film approached queer identity with considerably more humanity than many mainstream pictures of the period, even though censorship and social expectations still shaped what could be shown. What makes The Leather Boys worth revisiting is its refusal to make its characters simple symbols. Everyone is confused, selfish, or lonely in some way. Beneath the biker image is a sad story about young people rushing into adult lives before understanding either themselves or each other. Number 14. The Party's Over, 1965. Imagine arriving in swinging London, expecting fashionable young rebels, and discovering something much darker hiding behind the music. An American named Carson travels to England searching for his missing fiancée, Melina. She has fallen in with a group of Chelsea beatniks led by Moise, played with unnerving confidence by Oliver Reed. The group treats Carson's questions like entertainment, deliberately confusing him while hiding what actually happened. The deeper he investigates, the less playful their bohemian world becomes. A notorious party sequence became central to the film's censorship battle. British censors considered the original material so unacceptable that extensive alterations followed before the film finally received an X certificate. Director Guy Hamilton was so unhappy with the censorship that his name was removed from the released version. Restored versions reveal a much more serious film than its exploitation-style reputation suggests. It is about people using rebellion as a costume until their games produce consequences they cannot laugh away. Oliver Reed dominates whenever he appears. His Moise feels charismatic enough to attract followers, but dangerous enough that the audience immediately understands Carson should not trust him. Number 13. Cul-de-sac, 1966. A remote castle, two criminals, a nervous husband and his unpredictable wife should not be funny. Roman Polanski somehow makes the situation hilarious and deeply uncomfortable at the same time. Donald Pleasance plays George, who lives with his younger wife Teresa in an isolated castle on a tidal island. Their strange marriage is interrupted when wounded criminal Dickie arrives and effectively takes control of the property while waiting for his mysterious boss to rescue him. One of the film's great pleasures is watching power constantly shift. George appears submissive, Teresa mocks almost everyone, and Dickie acts dominant until events expose how little control he actually has. The dinner sequence involving unexpected visitors is particularly memorable. Everyone must pretend the situation is normal, while tension keeps building underneath the polite conversation. The film belonged squarely to the era of British ex-certificate filmmaking, when Polanski and other directors were testing how far psychological cruelty, sexuality, and unconventional characters could go. Cul-de-sac is difficult to categorize even now. It is part thriller, part absurd comedy, and part portrait of a marriage collapsing in real time. That uncertainty is precisely why it remains so entertaining. Number 12. The Girl on a Motorcycle, 1968. Few movies scream 1968 louder than Marianne Faithfull speeding across Europe in black leather on a Harley-Davidson. Rebecca wakes beside her sleeping husband and decides to ride from France toward Germany to meet Daniel, her university professor lover, played by Alain Delon. During the journey, memories reveal how their relationship began and why her comfortable married life feels increasingly impossible. The motorcycle scenes are the real attraction. Jack Cardiff fills the screen with psychedelic colors, dreamlike transitions, and Rebecca's internal thoughts, as roads, memories, and fantasies begin mixing together. What could have been a simple romantic drama becomes something stranger, part road movie, part fantasy, and part warning about mistaking reckless freedom for permanent happiness. The picture also holds an unusual place in ratings history. The Girl on a Motorcycle was the first movie to receive the newly introduced American MPOD X classification. That sounds far more extreme today than the rating actually meant in 1968. Its visual excess has aged into charm. Even when the story becomes melodramatic, Faithfull, Delon, and Cardiff's extraordinary photography make it impossible to confuse with anything else. Number 11. If, 1968. Before Malcolm McDowell became an icon of 1970s rebellion, he was already declaring war on authority in this savage British satire. Mick Travis attends an old-fashioned boys' boarding school ruled by hierarchy, humiliation, and traditions that seem designed to crush individuality. Senior students control younger ones, teachers protect the institution, and every ridiculous rule is defended simply because it has always existed. Director Lindsay Anderson begins with recognizable school drama and gradually pushes the movie into surreal territory. Some scenes suddenly switch from color to black and white, while fantasy and reality become increasingly difficult to separate. The most famous sequence arrives during the school's ceremonial finale, when polite establishment order gives way to open rebellion. It is deliberately excessive, functioning less like realistic action and more like a generation's anger exploding onto the screen. The film received an X certificate in Britain, with its violence creating particular concern for classifiers. Yet its real provocation was ideological. If was attacking blind obedience during a year already filled with worldwide protest. More than half a century later, its mixture of humor, rage, and youthful defiance still feels wonderfully dangerous. Number 10. Victim, 1961. Here is where the list moves beyond movies that were controversial, merely for style. Victim challenged something British society was still refusing to discuss openly. Dirk Bogarde plays Melville Farr, a successful London barrister with a respected career and seemingly perfect marriage. His life changes when a young man connected to his past becomes caught in a blackmail operation targeting gay men. At the time the story takes place, private relationships between men could still lead to criminal consequences in Britain. That made blackmail devastatingly effective. Farr eventually decides that protecting his reputation will only allow the criminals to continue destroying other lives. One of the movie's most powerful moments comes when Farr finally speaks honestly with his wife about the hidden part of his past. There is no sensational music or cheap twist. The tension comes entirely from two people realizing their marriage contains a truth they can no longer ignore. Victim received an X certificate and was groundbreaking for openly addressing homosexuality with sympathy. The BFI notes that it was the first English-language feature to use the word homosexuality. Today, its restraint makes it stronger. The scandal was never the characters. The scandal was the system that made them vulnerable. Number 9. Peeping Tom, 1960. British critics attacked this movie so fiercely that its director's career never fully recovered at home. Decades later, filmmakers and critics were calling it a masterpiece. Michael Powell centers the story on Mark Lewis, a shy film technician obsessed with recording fear through his camera. Instead of keeping the audience safely outside his disturbed mind, Powell repeatedly places us behind Mark's viewfinder. We see what he sees, turning the act of watching the movie into part of the film's uncomfortable argument. The opening sequence announces that idea immediately. A woman walks through nighttime London, while Mark secretly follows her with his camera. Rather than presenting him as a distant movie villain, the film makes the audience experience his obsessive way of looking. Later, his friendship with neighbor Helen offers the possibility that another life might have been possible for him. Peeping Tom played as an ex-certificate attraction in Britain, where its mixture of voyeurism and psychological horror caused outrage. Contemporary reaction was brutal. Its reputation completely changed with time. What critics once dismissed as tasteless now looks like one of cinema's smartest examinations of spectatorship, fear, and the uncomfortable power of the camera itself. Number 8. Repulsion, 1965. The scariest thing inside this apartment is not something hiding in a closet. It is the fact that we gradually stop knowing which parts of reality can be trusted. Catherine Deneuve plays Carol, a young woman living in London with her sister. She is withdrawn, uncomfortable around men, and increasingly disturbed by ordinary sights and sounds. When her sister leaves on holiday, Carol remains alone in the apartment. That isolation becomes the movie's engine. Cracks appear across walls. Familiar rooms seem to change dimensions. Sounds emerge from places where nobody should be. Polanski transforms an ordinary flat into a psychological maze. One of the most famous images involves hands seemingly emerging from the hallway walls as Carol moves through the apartment. Nothing needs to jump toward the camera. The image itself tells us that the boundary between the real world and Carol's perception has almost disappeared. Repulsion emerged from the same British ex-certificate culture that gave filmmakers greater room for disturbing adult themes. Yet its lasting power has little to do with censorship. The movie works because Polanski never provides a comfortable explanation. We are trapped inside Carol's deteriorating viewpoint, watching London continue normally just beyond the door while her private world collapses. Number 7. Blow Up, 1966. What if you accidentally photographed something important, but the closer you looked at the picture, the less certain you became about what actually happened? That question drives Michelangelo Antonioni's hypnotic mystery. David Hemmings plays Thomas, a successful fashion photographer wandering through swinging London with money, confidence, and very little genuine connection to anyone. While photographing a couple in a park, he captures several apparently ordinary images. Later, enlarging the photographs inside his studio, he begins noticing tiny details. A face in the bushes, a strange shape in the grass, perhaps evidence of something far more serious than a private meeting. The enlargement sequence became legendary because Antonioni turns photographic grain into suspense. Thomas keeps blowing up smaller portions of the picture until recognizable reality becomes almost abstract dots. The movie carried an X certificate in Britain, while its refusal to satisfy the old Hollywood production code helped demonstrate how rapidly cinematic boundaries were collapsing. Yet Blow Up is not really about solving a mystery. Antonioni is questioning whether images can ever give us objective truth. That idea feels even more relevant now. Thomas possesses photographic evidence, technology, and confidence, yet finishes the film less certain about reality than when he began. Number 6. I Am Curious, Yellow, 1967. Audiences were promised scandal. What they actually received was politics, documentary experimentation, social criticism, and a movie deliberately refusing to behave normally. Swedish actress Lena Nyman plays a fictionalized version of herself, a young woman obsessed with understanding inequality, class, and political hypocrisy. She interviews ordinary citizens and public figures while simultaneously participating in a fictional romantic storyline. Director Vilgot Schumann even appears as himself, constantly reminding us that we are watching a movie being constructed. Fiction interrupts documentary. Documentary interrupts romance. Sometimes the performers appear to be characters, and moments later they seem to be themselves. Its intimate material generated enormous attention, but the film's political curiosity is just as important. Lena asks people questions about wealth and equality that are far more confrontational than the sensational advertising suggested. American customs authorities seized the movie, beginning a major censorship fight before it finally reached U.S. theaters in 1969 with an X rating. That controversy made it famous, But it also created misleading expectations. I Am Curious, Yellow, is not conventional exploitation. It is messy, argumentative experimental cinema. Even viewers who dislike it have to admit one thing. Few films so perfectly capture the restless feeling that the rules of the 1960s were being rewritten while the cameras were still rolling. Number 5. Greetings, 1968. Before Robert De Niro became associated with some of America's most serious dramas, he appeared in this chaotic little counterculture comedy from Brian De Palma. The movie follows three young New Yorkers trying to avoid the Vietnam draft while becoming distracted by conspiracy theories, computers, filmmaking, relationships, and every other obsession floating through late 1960s America. There is barely a conventional plot. Instead, Greetings behaves like someone flipping rapidly between underground newspapers, political arguments, and experimental short films. De Niro plays John Rubin, an aspiring filmmaker fascinated with observing people. His sequences already contain themes of watching, recording, and performance that De Palma would revisit throughout his career. The film's style is deliberately rough. Characters address the camera, title cards interrupt scenes, and fantasy keeps colliding with reality. That unpredictability became part of its appeal. The MPA gave Greetings an X rating shortly after the American rating system began, and the classification remained after an intended appeal. Contemporary trade reports suggested the decision was connected particularly to one controversial film within the film sequence. Today, its provocative material is less surprising than its energy. It feels like young filmmakers discovering that Hollywood's old rulebook has suddenly disappeared, and immediately testing how much freedom they have. Number 4. Medium Cool, 1969. Very few fictional movies accidentally found themselves standing inside real history. Medium Cool did. Robert Forster plays John Casellas, a television cameraman in Chicago, who begins questioning the emotional distance required by his profession. He records accidents, political gatherings, and personal tragedy, but the camera allows him to remain detached from whatever is happening. Then director Haskell Wexler places fictional characters against the real unrest surrounding the 1968 Democratic National Convention. The resulting footage creates one of the decade's most extraordinary sequences. Actors move through streets filled with real demonstrators, police, and confusion. Suddenly, the question is no longer whether the movie looks realistic. Reality itself has entered the film. That blurred boundary supports the entire theme. If you record suffering without becoming involved, are you documenting events or hiding behind a camera? The MPA initially handed Medium Cool an X rating in July 1969, citing strong language and mature content. The controversy fit a film already challenging what mainstream American cinema was supposed to show. More than 50 years later, the filmmaking feels startlingly modern. Smartphones turned millions of ordinary people into potential witnesses, but Medium Cool was asking the central question decades earlier. When the camera is running, what responsibility does the person behind it have? Number 3. The Killing of Sister George, 1968. Imagine losing your job while everyone around you seems more interested in controlling your life than helping you. Now imagine your job is playing one of television's most beloved characters. Beryl Reid gives a ferocious performance as June Buckridge, an actress famous for portraying cheerful nurse Sister George on a popular television series. Off-camera, June is nothing like her wholesome character. When executives decide Sister George may be removed from the program, June's professional insecurity begins damaging her already complicated relationship with the younger Alice, nicknamed Childy. One of the film's best sections occurs inside the television offices. June discovers that the supposedly friendly world of broadcasting can discuss the destruction of her career with astonishing politeness. The smiles make the situation more brutal, not less. The movie became highly controversial because of its lesbian characters and adult relationship material. The B-Flat FC classified it X in February 1969, after requiring a significant scene to be removed, and some British local authorities still refused screenings. What survives beyond that controversy is Beryl Reid's performance. June can be cruel, jealous, funny, frightened, and heartbreakingly vulnerable within the same scene. The film refuses to make her respectable, simply to make her sympathetic, and that stubbornness is exactly what gives the picture its power. Number 2. Psycho, 1960. This one completely changed what audiences thought a mainstream thriller could get away with. Janet Leigh plays Marion Crane, a secretary who makes an impulsive decision involving money and leaves town, hoping to start again. Heavy rain forces her to stop at the lonely Bates Motel, where she meets awkward proprietor Norman Bates, played with unforgettable nervous charm by Anthony Perkins. Their conversation in the motel parlor is arguably even more important than the famous sequence everyone remembers. Surrounded by stuffed birds, Norman speaks quietly about his mother, loneliness, and how everyone is trapped inside private prisons. Marion begins reconsidering her choices. Then Hitchcock destroys the story audiences thought they were watching. The shower sequence became one of cinema's most analyzed scenes, built from rapid editing, sound, suggestion, and audience imagination, rather than prolonged explicit imagery. British censors still demanded changes before granting Psycho its X certificate. The classification sounds remarkable today, because generations have watched the film on television. But that proves how much standards changed. Hitchcock's real achievement was not simply shocking audiences. He manipulated identification itself. We follow Marion, then Norman, then investigators, never quite knowing whose story we are watching. More than 6 decades later, knowing every twist somehow does not stop Psycho from working. Number 1. Midnight Cowboy, 1969. And at number 1 stands the movie that destroyed the argument that an X rating automatically meant a film had no place in respectable Hollywood. Jon Voight plays Joe Buck, a naive young Texan who arrives in New York, believing his looks and confidence will make him successful. Instead, the city quickly strips away his fantasy. He meets Ratso Rizzo, played by Dustin Hoffman, a sickly street hustler with grand dreams of escaping to Florida. Their partnership begins through deception but slowly becomes one of the most moving friendships in American cinema. The famous street crossing moment captures the entire movie's energy. Ratso and Joe move through real Manhattan traffic when a vehicle interrupts them, producing Hoffman's legendary angry reaction. Whether partly improvised or shaped by circumstances on location, the scene feels completely alive. But the quieter scenes matter more. Inside their freezing apartment, these two men who pretend they need nobody gradually realize they have become each other's only dependable companion. Midnight Cowboy reached theaters with an X classification because of its adult themes. It was later re-rated R without being re-edited. Most remarkably, it went on to win the Academy Award for Best Picture. That alone makes it historic. What makes it number 1, however, is simpler. Remove every controversy and every rating, and an extraordinary movie remains. So which of these supposedly dangerous X-rated films is actually your favorite? The strangest thing about this list is how many movies once considered unacceptable now look thoughtful, artistic, and sometimes surprisingly restrained. That tells us as much about the 1960s as it does about cinema. Drop your pick in the comments, and if you enjoyed this trip through Hollywood's forbidden side, like the video, share it, and subscribe for more forgotten movie history.